Why was I standing at the window, staring at mountains that refused to move, when my past was already marching toward me? The letter sat on my table, its ivory stock gleaming under a weak shaft of morning light. I had carried explosives in war zones lighter than this envelope. Strange how a few words in scripted ink could weigh more than body armor. 11 years. That's how long I had been gone, erased, not forgotten. My family had practiced silence with the precision of a firing squad. Not one call, not one letter. Holidays went by like empty barracks. Birthdays were just another rotation of the earth. They had exiled me, and I had learned to live as though dead. But now they wanted me back. At least they wanted the appearance of me back. My sister's wedding, Sloane Fairchild, the golden one, the untouchable. The invitation carried her handwriting, clean as a scalpel, with a note that read, "Family is family." Family? For 11 years, that word was a language I had forgotten. And now it arrived at my door like a command. I picked up the envelope again, holding it between my fingers as if it might detonate. The fog over the Cascades was lifting, sunlight breaking through in ragged shafts. My coffee had gone cold hours ago, untouched. The silence in the room pressed heavier with every second. Memories bled through uninvited. I was 24 the day my mother locked me out of the house, not because I'd failed, not because I'd betrayed them, but because I had told the truth. Sloane's boyfriend, drunk, reckless, a car wrapped around a pole. My parents begged me to lie, to sign a statement that would shield him, shield her, keep the family's mirror spotless. I refused. Truth was my crime. And for that, I was cut out like a disease. The military taught me that silence is rarely neutral. Silence is complicity. On missions, silence could save lives, but at home, their silence was a verdict. You are nothing to us. I folded the invitation slowly, deliberately, and set it down. My hand lingered on the paper, then withdrew. "I'll go," I whispered into the empty room, my own voice startling in the stillness. "But not for them, not for forgiveness. I'll go so they see who I've become." The truth was, they didn't know me anymore. In those years of exile, I had become someone forged by fire. I enlisted when the world no longer wanted me, and I bled into a uniform that demanded everything. Nights under desert skis, the sound of gunfire in the distance like thunder that never stopped. Missions that hinged on a single breath, a single trigger pull. Later, when combat turned to advisory work, I carried those lessons into crisis zones and war-scarred villages. I learned to lead when no one else would. I learned to keep people alive when the ground beneath us was breaking apart. Piece by piece, I built a new name out of the ashes of the one they buried. And still, part of me never stopped wondering. If they had opened the door, if they had chosen truth over reputation, would I have stayed? Would I have built my life differently? That question haunted me more than gunfire ever did. The river nearby carried snowmelt, cold and steady, the same way time had carried me forward whether I wanted it or not. I walked its bank, gravel crunching under my boots, trying to quiet the war in my chest. But the letter still burned in my pocket. It wasn't just a wedding invitation. It was a battlefield summons. That night I couldn't sleep. The ghosts of 11 years whispered at the edges of my mind, shadows of conversations never had. I sat in the dark, staring at the ceiling until my phone buzzed with a message, an audio file, no sender. I pressed play. My father's voice cracked through the silence, weak, ragged, like a man already half gone. "You were right, I was wrong to stay silent. The truth finds its way, one way or another." I froze, every nerve firing at once. My vision blurred, my throat closed. For 11 years he had said nothing, choosing Sloane's protection over mine. And now, too late, he sent this. Vindication and grief tore through me in equal measure. It was the apology I had needed, and the betrayal I could never undo. I pressed the phone against my chest, teeth clenched. This wasn't just about Sloane anymore. This wasn't just about my mother's cruelty or my family's silence. My father had tried to pass me a torch in his last breath, and I couldn't let it die with him. Santa Fe burned hot against the horizon when I landed. The air smelled of dust and pinyon pine, dry as bone. The resort shimmered in adobe red, sun-drenched walls designed for beauty, not truth. Staff moved like soldiers rehearsing a drill, flowers, wine, chairs, every detail perfect, every crack hidden. My name was on the seating chart, small, off to the edge, with a single word in parentheses, estranged. The letters seared through me, sharper than any wound I had carried from combat. Click, heels on stone, my mother. Vivian Fairchild, face like porcelain, expression honed to a blade. Her silk suit whispered wealth, control. She stopped in front of me, eyes raking over me like I was an intruder at her embassy. "Don't stir up the past," she murmured, steel beneath the softness. "Let this day belong to your sister." She didn't wait for a reply. She walked away, leaving perfume and silence in her wake. But the past doesn't stay buried because someone orders it to. It surfaces like shrapnel under skin. Later the groom found me, Ethan Calder, firm handshake, rehearsed smile, eyes calculating. "Sloan hopes you'll read a few words of reconciliation during the ceremony," he said, not asking but warning. The military taught me to hear what isn't spoken. His tone wasn't suggestion, it was threat. And then another presence stepped into my orbit. Richard Calder, Ethan's father. Tall, silver-haired, the kind of man who never entered a room, he occupied it. His gaze fell to the badge clipped to my bag, Redline Resilience. My company, my post-service mission built from sweat and blood. He studied it. He studied me. And I knew in that instant he recognized me. Not just as Sloane's sister, but as the woman auditing the very foundation his empire stood on. The organization I had been contracted to review for irregularities. We didn't exchange words. We didn't need to. The air between us carried enough weight to crush bone. Back in my hotel room, I stared at the ivory invitation on the nightstand. I whispered into the silence, steady, unflinching. If they think I came here to be a backdrop in their play, they're about to learn otherwise. The first night passed heavy and restless. I dreamed of barracks, of dust storms, of gunfire that faded into my mother's voice saying, "Don't ruin this day." I woke with my heart racing, sweat slick on my back. The desert sun was rising, blazing gold against the adobe walls. My phone buzzed again, another message, this one from an auditor I trusted. Attached was a report. My stomach tightened as I scrolled. Calder Foundation payments, massive sums, but the vendor didn't exist. A shell company, money siphoned into shadows under Richard Calder's command. Embezzlement, concealed under a wedding veil. My pulse hammered. I slipped out into the courtyard, the file still burning in my hand. And then, as if the past had materialized into flesh, someone stepped in front of me. Noah, an old friend, older now, eyes darting with hesitation. "Marin," he whispered, "did you know Sloane's old boyfriend, the one from the crash? He's here. He's a groomsman." The world stopped. My chest cinched tight, breath caught like barbed wire in my lungs. 11 years collapsed into a single moment. The past wasn't buried. It was walking in a tuxedo. It was smiling for photographs. It was waiting in the wings of my sister's perfect day. And for the first time in years, I felt the old weight press against me, the weight of truth, of silence, of a choice that could never be undone. The war wasn't behind me. It was right here, dressed in silk and champagne. And this time, I wasn't going to lose. How do you prepare to face ghosts that walk with living faces? I sat on the edge of the hotel bed, hands pressed into the mattress, trying to steady the storm in my chest. The air conditioner hummed faintly, but it couldn't cool the fire rising in me. I reached for my phone, pressed play, and let my father's voice bleed through the speakers once more. "You were right. I was wrong to stay silent. The truth will find its way, one way or another." His voice cracked like a man confessing at the edge of death. I listened twice, 3 times, as if repetition could make the words solid, something I could hold in my palm. They only dissolved, leaving me gutted and raw. For 11 years, his silence had been louder than any battlefield. I had carried the weight of exile, of being erased, and he had chosen not to intervene. And now, long after he was gone, he sent this. Vindication laced with grief. A broken apology arriving too late to change the wreckage it left behind. I thought about leaving, packing my bag, driving out of Santa Fe, vanishing before the ceremony even began. My hands itched for it, my body screaming to retreat. But deep down, I knew that would only seal the silence again. If I left, they would keep telling their version of the story. My exile would remain the family's convenient fiction. No, I couldn't walk away, not this time. A sharp knock jolted me from thought. I opened the door. Richard Calder, perfectly pressed suit, silver hair glinting under the hall light. His presence filled the frame like a general entering hostile territory. He gestured toward the lounge. His expression said it wasn't a request. The lounge was dim, leather chairs soaked in the scent of old scotch. He poured himself a glass and sat back, studying me with eyes that had no room for warmth. A predator disguised as a philanthropist. "I've seen your company's name in reports," he said casually, though his words were weighted. "Redline resilience, hospitals, counties, emergency preparedness, impressive reach for someone with your history." He slid a folder across the table, a contract thick, neat, binding. Inside, a non-disclosure agreement, a draft partnership worth more than my firm's yearly budget. "Sign this," he said, his voice even, almost bored. "And tomorrow you keep your peace. No speeches, no surprises. You walk away with resources, connections, opportunity." My pulse thundered. The offer was clean on the surface, but I'd seen this play before. Years ago, they had asked me to sign my name to a lie, to bury truth for their reputation. It had cost me my family, my home, my place at the table. And here it was again, another signature, another silence. I closed the folder, slowly, deliberately, then pushed it back across the table. 11 years ago, I refused to sign away my voice, I said quietly. Tonight, I refuse again. His jaw tightened, a shadow flickering across his face. But he didn't argue. He didn't need to. Men like him always believed time was on their side. I stood, my legs steady though my heart hammered like gunfire. Outside, the desert night was sharp and cold, stars jagged as broken glass. I breathed them in, a reminder of every war-zone sky I had stood under and survived. The next morning, sunlight poured across the adobe walls in blazing gold. My hotel room was silent except for the faint buzz of my phone, a message from Sloan. "Marin, you'll read the reconciliation piece, right? For the family." I stared at her words, bile rising in my throat. For the family. A phrase wielded like a blade, not a request, a demand, a reminder of the prison they had built out of bloodlines. I opened my laptop instead, scrolling through the audit files again. Line after line, the Calder Foundation bled money into ghost accounts, shell companies, false vendors. It wasn't a small mistake. It was systemic rot. And if I brought it into the light, it would detonate more than Sloane's wedding. It would topple the Calder name, fracture their empire. A knock at the door pulled me from the screen. I opened it to find Noah standing there. Older now, edges worn by time, but his eyes carried the same kindness I remembered. And guilt, always guilt. "This was meant for you," he whispered, pressing a yellowed envelope into my hand. "Uncle Hale wrote it. Your mother hid it." My fingers shook as I tore it open. Inside, my father's handwriting sprawled uneven, desperate. Clipped to the page was a printed image from a doorbell camera. My breath stopped cold. My mother, hand outstretched. Keys pressed into Sloane's boyfriend's palm the night of the crash. She had known. She gave him the car knowing he was drunk, knowing it could destroy everything. And when the wreck came, she buried the evidence, buried me with it. My knees threatened to buckle. 11 years of exile hadn't been Sloane's sin alone. It had been hers. My mother, the matriarch who claimed to protect us, had fed me to the fire to keep Sloane untouchable. Rage and grief surged in me like twin explosions. My father had tried to confess, but too weak, too late. My mother had chosen deceit and made me carry the punishment. I pressed the letter against my chest, whispering through clenched teeth. If they think I'll be silent again, they're wrong. The hallway smelled of roses and champagne, music spilling faintly from the ballroom where guests were gathering. I straightened my shoulders, walked forward. But before I could reach the doors, my mother appeared from a side corridor. Her eyes were cold steel. "Marin," she said softly, almost tender, but her voice cut sharp. "Don't destroy your sister's life all over again." I slid the letter from my purse, flashed it before her eyes. Her face drained of color, lips parting in shock. She lunged for it, but I held firm, my grip iron. "This truth isn't yours to bury anymore," I told her, my voice steady as a sniper's aim. She froze, words locked in her throat, and I walked past her, heart pounding like war drums, only to nearly collide with him. The groomsman, Sloane's ex, the ghost behind the wheel the night that ended everything. He looked at me, recognition washing across his face, shame softening his jaw. "I'm sorry," he muttered, voice low, rough. "They forced me to stay quiet. Calder's lawyers covered for me. In exchange, I signed a statement that cleared them. I didn't have your courage." My hands trembled. The years collapsed into a single pulse of fury and bitter validation. He turned away, shoulders heavy, but before he disappeared, I caught sight of another figure watching. Ethan Calder, the groom, standing stiff, jaw clenched, gaze locked on me. He had heard enough. His face betrayed nothing but a faint, sharp nod, and then he stepped back into the ballroom, leaving the silence heavier than before. Back in my room, the letter still warm in my hand, I pulled the dress from the closet. Deep blue silk that shimmered like armor. I slipped it on, stood before the mirror. The reflection staring back wasn't the girl they cast out. She was gone, buried, replaced by someone harder, steadier, forged by exile and war. "Today," I whispered, my voice steady, "I won't be erased. Today I will tell the truth." Why was my name being called in front of a room that wanted me invisible? The adobe church shimmered in the Santa Fe sun, its stained glass windows scattering fractured light across polished pews. The air was thick with perfume, champagne breath, and rehearsed laughter. Music swelled, violins weaving like silk threads, delicate and perfect. Everything about the scene screamed performance. And yet at the back I sat alone, clutching a folded sheet of paper in my hand. The words weren't mine. They were Sloane's, written in her flawless script, a speech of reconciliation meant to play like music for the crowd, forgiveness packaged and tied with a bow. My palms were damp. My heartbeat pounded in my ears louder than the quartet. I had stood in briefing tents before missions, waiting for orders that could end with coffins draped in flags. I had sat in cockpits, oxygen mask pressing tight, knowing one wrong move could send me spiraling. But this moment, this quiet aisle, this folded paper felt heavier than all of it. Because this wasn't about life and death. It was about truth, and truth can kill in quieter, longer ways. The MC's voice rose above the music. "We invite the bride's sister to come forward." Sister, a word they hadn't used in over a decade. I stood, legs steady though my chest was shaking. The folded paper felt hot against my palm as I walked the aisle. Every eye followed me. Some curious, some hostile, some pitying, none welcoming. I reached the lectern, my throat tightened. My gaze swept across the sea of faces, searching for an anchor. My mother stared at the floor, jaw tight. Sloane clutched her bouquet, hands trembling just enough for me to notice. Ethan's gaze was sharp, unblinking, watching not just me but what this moment would become. I unfolded the paper, looked at the words, the lies, the performance, and then I set it down. I didn't read it. Instead, I raised my eyes, met the crowd, and spoke. 11 years ago, I was asked to lie to protect a reputation. I refused, and for that I was erased. Today, I refuse again. Families cannot be built on concealment. Love cannot exist if we are only props in someone else's performance. The silence that followed was absolute. A silence louder than applause, sharper than protest. Sloane's face went pale. My mother's lips trembled. Ethan's jaw locked like steel. And the guests, they sat frozen, some shifting in discomfort, others staring as if the floor might open beneath them. I folded the reconciliation speech, placed it gently on the lectern, and walked away. Whispers ignited behind me, low, unsettled, like sparks in dry brush. I felt the heat of every eye burning my back, but I didn't break stride. At the reception hall, golden light shimmered across crystal glasses and towering centerpieces. The laughter was thin now, brittle. Toasts rang hollow. Guests smiled with teeth but no warmth. The air was forced, as if the walls themselves knew something had cracked. I stood at the bar, glass of water untouched in my hand. The blue silk of my dress clung to me like armor, but my body felt exposed, raw. Richard Calder drifted over, glass of scotch in hand. He raised it in mock cheer. "The best thing a family can do," he said smoothly, "is learn to forget." I turned, met his eyes, steady and unflinching. "The best thing," I answered softly, "is learning to face the truth." His smile faltered, just for a flicker, but then he sipped his drink, the predator in him retreating behind polished composure. Later, I asked Sloane and Ethan to step into a side room. My mother followed, and Richard, of course, uninvited but unavoidable. The air in the room was thick, curtains drawn tight, muffling the laughter outside. I laid a sealed craft envelope on the table between us. My fingers didn't tremble. My voice didn't waver. "Inside are three things," I said. "My father's voicemail, his handwritten letter with the doorbell photo, and the auditor's report on the Calder Foundation's transactions." Ethan's expression hardened. Sloane's face went pale. My mother stiffened, but her hands betrayed her, twitching against her skirt. Richard simply folded his arms, jaw clenched. "I haven't sent this to the press," I continued. "Not yet, but if I am treated as a prop again, I will protect myself. This is your chance to confront the truth before the world does." Ethan picked up the envelope. His shoulders bore its weight even before he opened it. Sloane's lips trembled, eyes glistening with tears she could no longer blink away. I turned, walked to the door. The whispers of their breathless silence followed me out. In the hall, the music swelled again, thin and forced, as if nothing had happened. But something had, something irreversible. Later, when the guests were distracted by toasts and orchestrated laughter, I stood alone at the edge of the courtyard. The desert night was cold, stars sharp as steel. I thought about the missions I had survived, the nights I had walked away from explosions, carrying pieces of men who didn't. Those memories were heavy, but this moment was heavier. Because war teaches you what bullets can do. Family teaches you what silence can do. And silence can destroy a soul in ways shrapnel never could. I closed my eyes. In the darkness, I saw my father's face, heard his voice again. The truth finds its way, one way or another. And I knew then, this wasn't just about Sloane's wedding. It wasn't about revenge or retribution or even redemption. It was about stopping the silence from writing my story any longer. For 11 years, they had erased me. Tonight, I had drawn myself back onto the page. The cost I didn't know yet. But I had faced battle before, and I could face this. What happens when the masks finally slip, and there's no stage left to perform on? The private room smelled faintly of roses and scotch, but the air was heavier than any battlefield tent I'd ever stood in. The curtains were drawn, mooting the reception outside to a dull, lifeless hum. Only 4 of them remained inside with me: Sloane, Ethan, my mother, and Richard. Ethan tore the envelope open like a man unsealing a classified dossier. His hands shook, though his face stayed locked in that stoic mask. The letter slid out first, my father's handwriting scrawled in shaky lines. Then the doorbell image. Finally, the auditor's report, cold numbers that told a story no spin could bury. He spread the contents across the table. His shoulders sank as he read, as if the air itself pressed down on him. Sloane reached for the photo, her hands trembling so violently the paper rattled between her fingers. When she saw it, our mother, hand outstretched, keys pressed into her boyfriend's palm the night of the crash, her breath shattered. A sob tore from her throat, raw, unguarded. Tears streaked her makeup, staining the silk of her dress. I was terrified, she choked, her voice breaking in pieces. Terrified of losing everything. I let you carry it all because I knew you, never been the way I did. Her words hit me like shrapnel, honest, brutal, late, but still something in me softened at the sound of her cracking. Sloane, the golden daughter, the untouchable, finally admitting she had been nothing but afraid. Ethan's voice cut through, sharp and cold. The honeymoon's off, he said flatly, and the prenup's morality clause is in effect. There will be a review immediately. His words landed like artillery fire, each syllable precise, devastating. Richard's jaw tightened, the predator caught in his own snare. His silence said everything. This was no longer a controlled performance. This was collapse. My mother sat frozen, eyes wide but lips sealed. The same silence she had weaponized for over a decade now trapped her, choking her from the inside. I wanted her to speak, to admit, to confess, but she didn't. And maybe she never would. I stood by the door, steady as a sentry. I don't need your apologies, I said quietly. I only need the truth to stop being buried. And then I left them there, to drown in the wreckage they had built. The reception carried on like a hollow play. Laughter forced, glasses raised half-heartedly. But the cracks showed in every corner, every whispered glance. The bride who couldn't stop trembling. The groom whose eyes no longer touched hers. The matriarch pale and brittle, her smiles breaking under the weight of unspoken shame. I wandered the courtyard, air cool against my flushed face. The stars above were merciless, cold, and unblinking. I thought of all the nights I'd lain under different skis, deserts, jungles, mountain outposts. Nights when the silence between bursts of gunfire felt like borrowed time. But this silence was different. This was the silence of people pretending not to notice the truth unraveling in real time. Weeks later, long after Santa Fe had faded into memory, the headline broke. Calder Foundation, under review for financial irregularities. I hadn't spoken to any reporter. I hadn't needed to. Ethan had made sure the first domino fell. The empire Richard had built now trembled on shaky ground, its walls cracking where no amount of plaster could patch. I sat on my porch in Oregon, mountains blanketed in snow behind me, the river moving steady and cold. A letter arrived in my mailbox, written in my mother's careful hand. Her words were neat, deliberate. I thought I was protecting Sloane, but I see now I was only protecting a lie. It wasn't the apology I wanted, not the reckoning I had deserved, but it was something, a sliver, a fracture in her armor, proof that even the woman who had erased me could no longer deny what she had done. Sloane entered therapy. Tentative steps, but steps nonetheless. Trying to untangle the web she had spun, trying to crawl back to a place where truth could live alongside love. Ethan threw himself into board meetings, auditors, restructuring. His voice rose louder than Richard, carrying a steel edge that suggested he would not carry his father's sins. And Richard, he stood quieter now, still powerful but diminished. The untouchable predator suddenly mortal, his empire bleeding trust with every passing day. As for me, I turned down every offer Calder's allies dangled in front of my firm, every contract, every partnership. My team asked why. I told them the only thing that mattered. We work in the light, We don't sell our silence. And for the first time in 11 years, the ground beneath my feet felt solid. Snow fell steady outside my cabin, flakes drifting like ash against the gray sky. I sat wrapped in a wool blanket, a cup of hot tea warming my hands. My phone buzzed. A message from Sloan. "I'm in therapy now. I want to talk when you're ready." I set the phone down, reached for my father's letter again. This time the words didn't pierce like before. They eased. The ache had softened, shifting into something almost tender. "The door isn't shut forever," I whispered into the cold air, "but the key is mine now." 11 years erased, and yet here I was, whole, honest, free. The snow kept falling, steady, quiet. A new kind of silence, not the silence of exile, not the silence of erasure, but the silence of peace. For the first time I let it settle, and I breathed. What do you do when the war ends, but the battlefield stays inside you? Back home the Cascades stood like sentinels, their peaks snow-crowned and solemn against the pale winter sky. The river ran steady below my porch, its surface broken by small shards of ice that drifted with the current. Nature had a way of moving forward, indifferent to the wreckage left in its wake. I envied it. I wrapped myself in a wool blanket, mug of tea cradled in my hands. The steam curled upward, vanishing into the cold. My phone buzzed against the arm of the chair, Sloane's name lighting the screen. A simple message. "I'm in therapy now. I want to talk when you're ready." I stared at it, thumb hovering, but I didn't answer. Not yet. For 11 years, she had let me drown in silence. 11 years of missed birthdays, of empty holidays, of being erased from photographs and conversations as if I had never existed. 11 years when her truth, or rather her fear, mattered more than mine. And yet I couldn't ignore the tremor in those words. Therapy, a small step, but a step nonetheless. Maybe the first real one she had ever taken without a mask. I set the phone down, reached for the letter folded beside me. My father's handwriting, shaky and uneven, his confession, his attempt at redemption in his final days. "You were right. I was wrong to stay silent. The truth will find its way one way or another." I whispered the words aloud, not for him this time, but for me. For the woman who had carried exile like a second skin, who had built herself in deserts and firelines, who had learned to survive when the ground gave way. The military had taught me how to endure chaos, how to operate when everything around me was collapsing, how to breathe through fear, steady my hands, and act when hesitation could kill. But what they never taught me was how to come home, how to sit in a quiet room with no mission, no orders, no objective, only memory and silence. Family silence had been harder to survive than combat. Bullets tore flesh. Silence tore identity. And yet here I was, whole in a way I hadn't been before. The Calder Foundation scandal spread slowly at first, then faster like a crack in glass. Local papers carried headlines. National outlets sniffed around. Ethan, for all his sharpness, worked to shield what he could. Richard grew quieter, his empire bleeding credibility. Sloane faded from the spotlight, her perfect veneer slipping. I watched it all from a distance, the way you watch smoke rise from a fire you no longer have to fight. But at night, when the house was still and the mountains loomed black against the stars, I found myself replaying it. The church, the lectern, my own voice refusing to bend, the look on Sloane's face when the truth finally touched her. I told myself I didn't care if she reached for me now, that I didn't need her, that I was free, whole, beyond them. But the human heart is not a soldier. It doesn't obey orders, it remembers, it aches, it hopes, even when it knows better. One evening I walked down to the river, boots crunching against frozen gravel. The water moved cold and unbothered, a mirror of time itself. I crouched, let my hand hover just above the surface, close enough to feel the chill without breaking it. I thought of the missions where I'd sat in silence, waiting hours for a signal, watching shadows crawl across sand or stone. Silence had been my ally then, the pause before action, the space where clarity was born. Here silence still carried weight, but it wasn't my enemy anymore. It was mine to command. The phone buzzed again later that night. Another message. Sloan, longer this time. I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't even forgive myself. But I don't want to keep lying. I want to start over. Even if you're not ready, I'll wait. I read it twice, 3 times. My chest tightened, my throat catching. There was a time when I would have given anything to hear those words, but now I wasn't sure what I wanted. Forgiveness isn't a switch you flip, it's a path, and sometimes it's one you walk alone. I set the phone aside, reached for my tea. Outside, snow began to fall, soft and steady, each flake silent, fleeting, gone before it touched the ground. I closed my eyes, letting the quiet settle, and for the first time in years the silence didn't feel like exile. It felt like peace. But peace doesn't last forever. A week later, an envelope arrived in the mail. Not ivory this time. Plain white, stamped with a federal seal. My stomach knotted before I even tore it open. Inside, a summons. Testimony requested. The Calder Foundation investigation was no longer just a headline. It was official. I sat at the table, the paper trembling in my hand. The words blurred as memories surged. Courtrooms. Depositions. The same pressure I had felt 11 years ago when they begged me to sign my name to a lie. Back then I had refused and it had cost me everything. Now I was being asked again, but not to bury truth, to speak it, to stand in it. My chest rose and fell, steadying. This time I wouldn't be alone. This time silence wasn't my cage, it was their undoing. The snow outside thickened, the mountains vanishing into white. I stood at the window, paper still in my hand, and whispered the words that had carried me through deserts, through exile, through every mission I had survived. Hold steady, speak truth, stand firm. The war wasn't over yet, but this time I was ready. How do you tell the truth when the room is built to bury it? The federal building in Portland was gray, windowless and heavy with the weight of secrets. I walked through its doors with my shoulders straight, boots clicking against the polished floor. My hands were steady, but my pulse betrayed me, quick and sharp, echoing in my ears. Testimony. That word carried more than legal weight. It was a word I had lived by on the battlefield, in briefing tents, on radios crackling across broken skis. Testify to what you saw, what you did, what went wrong. But this room wasn't about war zones. It was about family, and sometimes those wounds cut deeper than shrapnel. I sat at the long table, oath fresh on my tongue, the flag hanging heavy behind me. The panel of auditors, attorneys, and federal agents watched me with unreadable eyes. Their pens were sharp as scalpels, their silence heavier than armor. "Ms. Fairchild," one began, voice clipped, "you are here to provide insight into the Calder Foundation's financial practices. Do you understand the gravity of your statement today?" Yes. My voice was calm, steady, though inside a storm roared. They slid documents across the table, ledger sheets, bank transfers, the same evidence I had held in my hotel room weeks ago. Now stamped and cataloged, they were no longer whispers, they were fact. I explained what I had uncovered, the shell companies, the ghost vendors, the way Richard Calder had siphoned money through fronts while families donated in good faith. Each word landed like a hammer, breaking through years of polished facades. But then the questioning shifted, not about numbers, about me. "You have a history with the family, don't you?" an attorney asked, tone deceptively polite. I swallowed, yes. "Estranged, is that correct?" The word sliced through me again, the same way it had burned on the wedding seating chart. Estranged. A word they loved to use as if it explained everything. I drew a breath. I was erased by my family 11 years ago after I refused to lie for them. That history is why I'm here now, because silence has consequences. Their pens scratched, recording my every syllable. I forced myself not to flinch. The cross-examination pressed harder. Why had I waited to come forward? What proof did I have of intent? Could my testimony be biased, given my personal history? Each question was a bullet, each answer a shield. I drew on the discipline carved into me from years in uniform, the calm under fire, the control of breath, the ability to stay steady when the world tried to break you. "I am not here for revenge," I said finally, my voice low, deliberate. "I am here because truth matters. It mattered then, it matters now, and I will not bury it again." The room went still, the air shifted, and in that silence I felt something new, not exile, not erasure, but power. When it was over, I stepped out into the cold air, lungs burning with release. Snow flurried against my face, sharp and clean. I stood on the steps, letting the chill wash over me. Behind me, the walls held my words. Ahead of me, the storm still loomed. I thought of Sloane, of her messages, of the therapy sessions she claimed to be taking. Part of me wondered if she was following the hearings, if she read my words in the press, if she felt the weight of what I carried. But I couldn't think of her now. I had to think of me. That night I sat in my cabin, fire flickering in the hearth. My rifle leaned in the corner, oiled and ready, though no mission called for it now. Old habits die slow. I poured myself a glass of water and stared at the flames. The hearings would continue. Richard would fight back. He had lawyers, money, power. He would not surrender easily. Men like him never did, but he was bleeding now, and I had drawn the blade. My phone buzzed. A message, this time not from Sloane but from Ethan, the groom who had watched me burn his wedding to the ground with truth. "I heard your testimony. I believe you. If you need an ally, you have one." I stared at the words, shock prickling my skin. Ethan Calder, son of the Empire, turning against his own blood, or maybe just protecting himself. Either way, it shifted the ground beneath us all. I set the phone down, leaned back in my chair. The war wasn't over. The enemy wasn't just outside anymore. It was splintering from within. For a moment, I closed my eyes. The quiet hummed around me, and I remembered the words my father had left me, the words I had carried through every step of this fight. "The truth will find its way, one way or another." And I whispered back into the firelight, "Yes, but only if someone is willing to carry it." What happens when the enemy you fought for years suddenly comes asking for mercy? The storm came fast. Richard Calder didn't stay silent for long. Men like him never did. Within a week of my testimony, articles began appearing in sympathetic outlets, pieces questioning my credibility, painting me as a bitter, estranged daughter lashing out. Photos of me in uniform were dragged out, twisted to fit their narrative. One headline sneered, "Ex-soldier with family grudge targets Calder Foundation." Another claimed I was after money, influence, revenge. I'd faced insurgents with rifles, cities burning behind me, and yet this war of words cut deeper than bullets. Because it wasn't strangers attacking me, it was my family's silence fueling the story. Their refusal to defend me spoke louder than Richard's spin ever could. One night, sitting on my porch under a sky thick with snow clouds, my phone buzzed. An unknown number. For a long moment I considered ignoring it. Then I answered. Her voice broke through, "Sloane." "Marin," she hesitated, the silence stretching. "I know you don't owe me anything, but please, can we talk, face to face?" I closed my eyes, jaw tightening. I wanted to hang up, to let her drown in the lies she'd built. But something in her tone, raw, unpolished, stripped of performance, made me pause. "Where?" I asked finally. The cafe was quiet, tucked into a corner of Bend I rarely visited. Snow fell in soft sheets outside the window, blurring the streetlights. Sloane sat across from me, coat still buttoned, hands wrapped tight around a mug she barely sipped from. For the first time in 11 years, she didn't look like the perfect daughter. Her hair was loose, her makeup smudged, her eyes swollen from crying. "I don't know how to start," she admitted, her voice breaking. Everything I say sounds like an excuse. Then don't excuse it, I said quietly. Say the truth. She looked down, tears slipping free. That night after the crash, I begged Mom to protect me. I begged her to make it go away. And she did. At your expense, I let her. I let her bury you so I wouldn't have to carry the shame. Her words hit me like a blade twisting in an old wound. The honesty was raw, but it came soaked in years of silence. Years I couldn't get back. I hated you for not covering for me, she continued, voice trembling. Because deep down I knew you were right, you always were, and that made me feel small, weak. So I chose the lie, I chose myself. I stared at her, emotions warring inside me. Anger, sadness, a flicker of the sister I once loved. Do you know what it's like, I whispered, to be erased? To watch the people who raised you look through you like you're a stranger, to hear silence where there should have been love. Her tears came harder. She reached across the table but stopped short, hands shaking. I can't fix what I did. I can only tell you I'm sorry, and that I'm trying to change, even if you never let me back in. I sat there frozen, torn between the soldier in me, who had learned to cut loose what endangered the mission, and the sister in me, who still ached for connection. Finally I spoke. Change isn't words, it's choices. If you want me to believe you, then prove it. Stop letting silence write your story. She nodded, broken but resolute. For the first time, I believed she might mean it. Days later, Richard struck back harder. A legal notice arrived at my firm, an attempt to discredit me professionally, to brand my audit as biased, invalid. He wanted me cornered. He wanted me silenced again. But this time, I wasn't alone. Ethan reached out, backing my testimony, providing his own documentation. Allies I hadn't expected began stepping forward, colleagues, auditors, even a few within the Calder circle who had grown tired of Richard's rot. The tide was shifting, slowly, painfully, but shifting. Still at night, doubt gnawed at me. I lay awake staring at the ceiling, wondering if I could endure another exile. Another 11 years of being painted as the problem, the enemy, the bitter voice that wouldn't stay quiet. But then I remembered the lectern, the church, my own voice refusing to bend. I remembered the battlefield silence that had taught me how to breathe through fear, and I reminded myself I had already survived worse. The truth was fragile. It cracked easily under pressure, but it endured if someone was willing to carry it through the fire. And I was willing. How do you know when a war is finally over? Not with victory parades, not with headlines, not with applause. Wars end in quieter ways, with exhaustion, with silence, with the realization that there's nothing left to fight for. The Calder hearings dragged on for months. Each week another document surfaced, another witness stepped forward, another crack widened in the empire Richard had built. He stood at press conferences, jaw tight, eyes sharp, denying everything with a polish that might have worked in another era. But the tide had turned. Truth, once freed, is hard to cage again. I testified a second time, and a third. Each session tore old wounds wider, forced me to relive the night of the crash, the exile, the silence. But each time I stood a little straighter. My voice grew steadier. The narrative shifted from estranged daughter to whistleblower, from problem to witness. And then one morning, the headline came. Calder Foundation president, indicted on fraud and embezzlement charges. I sat at my kitchen table, the paper spread across the wood, steam rising from my untouched mug of coffee. Snow fell outside, soft and steady. For the first time in 11 years, I exhaled without weight on my chest. Richard Calder had fallen. But not everything was celebration. Truth has collateral damage. Sloane's marriage to Ethan unraveled quietly, the honeymoon canceled, their lives splitting in different directions. My mother retreated into silence again, but this time it was different, not weaponized, not controlling, just hollow, empty. And Sloane kept reaching. Therapy turned into letters. Letters turned into calls. Small, careful steps, always with the same undertone. I don't expect forgiveness, but I want to try. One afternoon she appeared on my porch. No makeup, no silk, just Sloane, shivering under a wool coat, clutching a thermos of coffee as if it might shield her from the cold. "I didn't know if you'd open the door," she admitted. I hesitated, then I stepped aside. We sat together, watching the river slide past in silence. She told me about therapy, about shame, about finally telling her own truth, even when it cost her. For the first time, she spoke not as the golden daughter, but as a woman stripped bare. "I don't want to erase what I did," she whispered. "I just want to stop pretending it didn't happen." I listened, not ready to forgive, but ready to hear. That was enough for now. Weeks later, I walked into my office at Redline Resilience. My team looked up, waiting for direction. The Calder scandal had drawn attention, offers, temptations, but I had already made my decision. "We work in the light," I told them. "We don't sell our silence." Their nods were quiet but firm. For the first time, I felt not just like a survivor, but a leader. Someone who had taken the worst exile and turned it into ground worth standing on. That night, sitting alone again by the fire, I unfolded my father's letter one last time. His shaky handwriting no longer pierced. It soothed. "You were right. I was wrong to stay silent. The truth will find its way one way or another." He hadn't been able to carry it in life, but he had left it for me, and I had carried it all the way here. I looked at the flames, their light flickering against the glass, and whispered, "Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts." The snow fell steady outside, blanketing the mountains in quiet white, and for the first time in 11 years, I let the silence settle, not as exile, not as erasure, but as peace. The war was over, and I was still standing.